One of the things I love most about finding a new series is re-experiencing what makes me love manga and comics. Sitting down and reading a really good story always makes me smile. I can get sucked in for hours at a time just thumbing through pages of expertly written material that is filled with the blood, sweat, and tears of the author. When the effort of each panel becomes apparent to anyone who sees it, there's really nothing better than reading something where you know the author has put their all into it. It's also, at the same time, a reality that most people don't get introduced to a new series this way. I was first introduced to Baki in 2018 through the Netflix adaptation of one of Baki's middle arcs, the Most Evil Death Row Convict Saga. Although this was pretty deep into Baki's now 22-year-old story, and even though I knew nothing about the characters, motivations, backstories, and pretty much anything else that makes someone know what's happening in a story, what followed became a multi-day binge filled with some of the most absurdly muscular, violent, jaw-dropping characters and events that I've ever seen. Every moment, every spectacle became even more preposterous as the show went on, as it continued to ramp up the intensity, action, and emotional displays of people putting everything on the line while fighting. I became absolutely awestruck by the sheer brutality put on display with every fight on screen. Watching these masses of muscle throw themselves at each other with every ounce of their being beyond the limits of any typical human was just so enticing. I really liked the Netflix adaptation of the show. It's what introduced me to the world of Grappler Baki itself. But it wasn't until the beginning of this month that I finally decided to check out the manga, and when I tell you that I have been completely consumed by the work of Kisuke Itagaki, the author of Grappler Baki, I completely mean it. It is absolutely and without question in a category of its own for its unique nature depicting of what's possible in a fight. The moments that I thought were really eye-catching and badass from the Netflix show were amplified in a way through reading the original manga, and I want to share why I think these fights are some of the best in the industry. It's plainly absurd but brilliant all at the same time. And through reading, at the time of writing this script, no exaggeration, 545 chapters in 3 weeks, I think I found out why these fights are so enjoyable. In this video, I want to go over how Itagaki uses character design, anticipation, and impact to make these scenes so enjoyable. Before the first punch or kick is thrown, Itagaki sets up each character with dynamic physiques. While most are, at first glance, just muscle-bound brutes who look like they could have muscles on their eyes, they never get confusing for me as the reader. I think a less talented author could get lost in the sauce, so to speak, in just two giant blobs of muscles wrapped up against each other, but each fighter in Baki is decorated with their own personal flair, personality, and unique stature that separates them from the rest of the cast. What this does for us is that these character designs give insights into how someone fights. When looking at Doppo Orochi, aside from his bald head and short stature, you can see that this man is built in such a way that you know he's a master combatant. Itagaki uses these tight and compact images to show his muscles and stature, but look even closer. It's the smaller details that might not pop out originally, but by just taking an extra second to really examine a character, they become more pronounced. Look at the huge knuckles he's drawn with. They look like meatballs. The reader instinctively sees these calloused and swollen hands and knows that hundreds of thousands of punches have been thrown for them to grow like that, even if we aren't instinctively told. One of the hardest things to do as an author is to input information in a character design, where we as an audience know things about a character just by a simple glance. We know just from looking at Orochi that he's a fighting master from everything that he encompasses in his poise, stature, and design. Shibukawa, on the other hand, is a tiny, frail-looking man in comparison to the other fighters that we see in the universe. While he's definitely not out of shape, he's not someone who can rely on his muscles or pure strength to beat his opponents. It's through pure mastery of his techniques that allow him to not only compete against larger opponents, but even dominate them. Due to his character design, we're expecting the answer to the question of how does this character even playing field when fighting? And Itagaki does just that. So after these characters are established with their own unique character designs, what happens after they meet? How does an author create tension with people just standing face to face with each other? Itagaki does this really cool effect in the backgrounds of scenes, where every once in a while, he will start to use their very presence as a way to start bending the environment they're in. It's a battle before the battle. This warped perspective not only shows that these two powerful opponents are sizing each other up, but I'll say that from my own personal perspective and from what I imagine a lot of other readers are experiencing, it does a really good job to get me hyped up for a good fight. It's the way that straight edges bend and twist and start to warp not only our sense of the panels and what's happening, but in turn affect how we prepare ourselves for the upcoming bout. Itagaki does a great job to make sure that it just leaks off of the page in the framing of the characters, the kanji effects, and the panel layouts. For example, this interaction between Retsu and Katsumi leads up to, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, one of my favorite panels in the entire manga. Hayo Retsu, on the left, is a master of Chinese Kempo, and on the right is Katsumi Orochi, who is a practitioner of modern-day Japanese karate. Orochi, in a moment of extreme ego, says that their karate has surpassed the 4,000 years of Chinese Kempo history. Retsu confronts him, but he does it in a way where he doesn't curse Orochi out. He doesn't get into his face and says that he'll kick his ass or anything like that. He just sternly walks up to him and says that he needs to correct his mistake, and that his actions are an insult to the craft that he's dedicated his life to. Orochi declines and continues to keep his position, and after one last threat towards Retsu, Itagaki draws one of my favorite panels. At the drop of a hat, we see Retsu drop into a fighting stance, and this small singular panel gives us a ton to chew on. Look at how the kanji literally stabs Orochi here. This is highlighted and colored in such a way that it gives this heavy and sharp impact, breaching from one character to another. It could even be perceived as the first attack of the fight, despite Retsu not even physically hitting Orochi yet. Retsu is ready to lay down his life for what he believes in, and you can see the impact at the spot underneath Retsu's feet as he braces himself in this attack position. Itagaki chooses this really thick outline across Retsu's upper body, and his eyes are just white and piercing. It even brings a shot of surprise across Orochi's face. There's so much to dissect here that you can't help but smile when reading. This aspect of not lying down to these insults and taking these small barbs just as seriously as any kick or punch is what makes this scene not only a great character moment for Retsu, but in turn allows Itagaki to flex some real creative muscle in the layout of a panel. Remember that everything I've mentioned thus far is purely building up to the intensity of a fight. No punch has been thrown. It's in this aspect of Baki that Itagaki really succeeds in. It's the anticipation of the fight. And when we finally get to the point of combat, he expertly carries that skill of anticipation into the fights themselves. Itagaki's fights are extremely clear in the way they're set up. Before every hit, that skill of anticipation is thrown off. The step into the hit, the way that somebody's body twists, winds up, and uncorks to get the maximum amount of power into it. The shifting of the hips and shoulders to make sure that every blow is hitting as hard as possible. There's a way that the characters' bodies are individually segmented and unwound leading into a punch. You imagine a spring going off inside the body that's on the page. It's an extremely technical way to show someone trying to hit another person. After the windup, just as we're starting to release the pressure, Itagaki holds off from just giving us the hit that we're wanting. He's letting that anticipation build just a bit longer by focusing on the incoming fist, knee, foot, head, or anything else that these characters are finding themselves throwing at the opponent. It's this hype that's being built up in every fight. I think that these are so impactful because Itagaki dangles the hits in front of us for just a little while longer than we would normally get them in other works. And that results in these just beautiful, heavy blows. Seeing someone's vision start to fade from a concussion, their skin is doughy and left behind as their skulls are traveling away with the punch, hits in the chest showing the amount of force and weight that carries through the backs of targets. I think that because of how accustomed we become throughout reading the story for how detailed these hits are in Baki, we know they're coming, and by holding off on showing us that hit for just an extra panel longer, it's something that we've all grown accustomed to and are excited for. Once that hit finally lands, it's this cathartic release where we can just bask in the pain and destruction that's being inflicted. Seeing these master fighters writhe in agony after a hit just sells every bit of anguish we imagine they're going through. Itagaki is not shy to show teeth falling out, blood pouring out of every opening on the body, bones being smashed to smithereens. And then they just get up to get taken down again and again and again. It's truly a story of a struggle against an opponent, but also a struggle against oneself, where they're excited and showing that they're tough enough to withstand their opponent's onslaught and turn the tide of battle, getting ready to match the blows that they just received. But you can't really talk about Grappler Baki without talking about the grappler part of the name. It's really tough to make holds and the lockings of joints as dynamic and eye-catching as a hit is, and while they definitely don't make as many appearances as the hits do, since a lot of the characters don't necessarily specialize in a grappler or jujitsu style of fighting, when they do come up, I think they're truly excellent. One of the fights where grappling is just beautifully done is the fight between Baki and Hanayama, with some of the grips and throws being conventional and some are very much not. Hanayama is this monstrously large teenager who is so physically strong that he can tear a deck of cards off with finger strength alone. When he's in a fight, he has this unbelievably wild ability to grip someone's forearm so hard that the veins and muscles burst out from underneath the skin. And as a side note, I'm almost positive that I can't show that on YouTube, so if you really want to see it, you'll have to eventually read the story for yourself. But with the size difference between these two, where Hanayama is basically twice the height and weight that Baki is, any throw or grip that Baki uses against him would, by all logic, be extremely hard to do, if not outright impossible. We know from real life fighting that weight classes exist for a reason. But because of this, when Baki finally gets the grip that he needs to turn the tables, it's a huge effort that he has to exert. You see him taking the time to grip around the forearm, throw his entire body in the windup, his leg is even in the air for that extra bit of weight and leverage, and seeing Hanayama's huge muscles tightening and working against him, until Baki is finally able to make that throw and slam him in the ground in just a brutal scene of sheer violence. I think that Itagaki's fights are so special because he very clearly and deliberately takes the time during each fight to sit and wait for these big hits and moments to build up. I can count on one hand how many quote-unquote big fights basically end in a few hits. Almost every fight in the series are all properly drawn out clashes in both a literal and metaphorical sense. And I will say that while a lot of the plot points in Baki are a little exaggerated or even just plain silly, I don't think that some objective, realistic fight has ever been Itagaki's style or purpose for writing Baki. To me, I see the fights in Baki as expansions and thought experiments for what martial arts are capable of, what lengths people will go to prove that they are stronger than their opponent. And by pushing these ideas through the narrative, it frees Itagaki from any preconceived notions of what a fight should be, and it pushes the idea of a supernatural level of human talent as a feast for the eyes. Can a human really crunch someone so hard that they become flat as a pancake? No, of course not. But honestly, it's really metal when we see it, and in turn, that's why Itagaki includes it. At the beginning of the video, I talked about how my first exposure to Baki was through the Netflix adaptation. While excellent and definitely just a good time, I think that there's something here in the manga that can't be properly replicated through the anime. There are just so many minute details, and there's so much love that goes into each of these panels that just can't be recreated on a time crunch like a Netflix adaptation. The time that Itagaki takes to ensure that you see every bit of power leading into a hit just simply can't be matched. If you haven't done yourself the favor of reading it, I would put Baki and all of its following stories as next on your list. But that's all that I have for today. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate that you took the time. If you liked this and want to see more videos on what makes art like this so cool, consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment on what you'd like to see next. I have a few projects in the pipeline right now, so hopefully the next one can live up to your expectations. I release a more in-depth video like this once a month, and I've been starting to look at more short-form content that doesn't necessarily need a full-length video. I actually already have one that's posted that's under a minute, so feel free to check it out. Thanks again. I'll talk to you soon. This was Panel Flow.